Retro-inspired games are a dime a dozen nowadays, and it's not always that something catches my attention in the same way that Panzer Paladin does. This love letter to old classics like Castlevania and Blaster Master was developed by a studio called Tribute Games. Very appropriate. The company was founded in 2011 by former Ubisoft veterans who worked on games like that Scott Pilgrim game that was stuck in licensing hell until recently. Their mission is to use modern technology to recreate the design of yestercentury, something that they've definitely achieved with Panzer Paladin. The story is that the Earth is under attack by some pesky invaders who deploy giant weapons that serve as portals to summon demons from hell. Humanity is on the verge of extinction, and the only thing stopping that is Gauntlet, an organization that develops high-tech power suits called Paladins. You play as Flame, an android lady who looks like she came out of some 80s anime, and also the pilot of Grit, the last remaining paladin. Your mission is to defeat the weapon keepers located around the world, and to recover their weapons so that you can access the Big Bad's fortress and smash his face in with the power of technology and Pointy Sticks. You get some really well-drawn cutscenes between levels, but if you haven't figured it out yet, this game is a throwback to the NES era of action platformers, so a complex story isn't exactly a priority. Though you do have two endings, which can be chosen right at the very end. The story mode just drops you off right in the very first level, but once you complete that, you get to select from various locations all over the world. Each location has a linear stage with a weapon keeper at the end, and once you defeat all of them, you can enter the inverted tower where you must clear the last few levels in order. And once you're done with that, you unlock the remixed story mode, which takes the same levels and boss fights and remixes them to provide you with a new challenge. Every level gets more environmental hazards, more instant death pits, and more complex enemy placements. Although this remixed mode doesn't get anywhere close to the cock and ball torture of games like Castlevania 3 or the Ninja Gaiden trilogy, the design philosophy is very much rooted in the classics that it takes inspiration from. Panzer Paladin is what I would call enhanced retro. It's a nostalgia-fueled recreation of what your brain tells you that old games looked like, even though in reality they didn't. Being displayed on a 16:9 resolution is the most obvious inconsistency, but it also doesn't flicker if there are too many sprites on screen. And did you know that the NES didn't have its own exact palette, which is why enthusiasts get into heated arguments about the color of the sky in Super Mario Bros? The default soundtrack doesn't quite pass as authentic, however, and while the developers refer to it as 16-bit, it's more like half the instruments are full CD quality and the other half is 8-bit chiptunes. I'm not complaining though. I like the music a lot, and a free update added an entire alternative soundtrack that does sound like an NES game, so I don't think anyone will be left out here. From a technical standpoint, the only nitpick I have is that some backgrounds don't scroll smoothly, and that I wish the game supported frame rates above 60 for that extra smoothness. But thankfully the assets are properly scaled up to 1080p, so it doesn't suffer from uneven pixel sizes or anything. It also includes a CRT filter if that's your thing, although sadly you don't have any settings to configure it to your liking. This concept of enhanced retro also applies to the gameplay. At its core, Panzer Paladin is a standard 2D platformer. You go from left to right, jumping over obstacles and smacking enemies on your way, and it's so smooth and nice. But there's a lot more to it than what meets the eye. Your basic moveset includes a simple forward strike, a downward stab that lets you bounce on enemies, and a jump attack that not only serves to hit enemies above, but also doubles as a second jump. You have a shield that is always deployed and can block attacks depending on whether you're standing or crouching. There's also a backdash that gives you a brief moment of invincibility, and with the correct timing, you can even parry an enemy's attack and leave them open for a few seconds. You can also exit Grit at any point and control Flame herself. She has her own separate health bar and an electrical whip with decent range that lets her swing around, but she is very fragile and has limited movement options. However, due to her small size, there are some sections in each level that only she can traverse until you reach a teleporter to summon Grit. If Grit is defeated, you're automatically forced into controlling Flame, but if she also goes down, you lose a life and it's back to the last checkpoint. What makes Panzer Paladin's gameplay stand out is the weapons that you acquire during gameplay, which serve as more than just pointy sticks to stab enemies with. Each weapon has its own shape and stats. Some deal more damage, some have longer range, some are faster, etc. Some also break faster than others, but all of them break at some point, so there's an element of conservation at play here. The biggest difference between weapons is their magic spell, which can be triggered at any time in exchange for breaking the weapon. The effect is the same regardless of how much durability is left, so ideally you want to cast it when it's about to break. Alternatively, you can throw the weapon forward. This deals a lot more damage than a regular attack, but will instantly break the weapon. Every stage is divided into 3 parts, 2 regular sections and a boss battle at the end. Between each one is a checkpoint that must be activated by inserting one of your weapons, otherwise you get sent to the start of the stage if you get slammed. You can also exchange weapons for health upgrades for Grit, so there is some incentive to preserve weapons. But while you can carry as many weapons as you want, each one increases your spirit burden. Depending on the value, you will see the Horseman, a recurring character with mysterious intentions, appear at certain points. At low spirit burden, he will gift you a powerful weapon to try and raise you to normal levels, while high spirit burden causes weapon keepers to become more powerful, and the Horseman will fight you to try and force you to spend weapons to bring the value down. Regular weapons are plentiful, so don't be afraid to throw or break a few when you need them. And if you do find yourself without any, you can always just punch assholes to death. And if you want a particular weapon, you can always replace stages. And no, Spirit Burden has no effect on which of the 2 endings you get, so don't worry about that. One other interesting aspect is the blacksmith, which lets you create and share your own toys of pain by drawing them pixel by pixel and assigning them some stat points. These are the weapons that the Horseman gifts you, and in true internet fashion you can find all kinds of gag weapons. If you have no sense of humor, you can always turn them off. On PC, this is handled through the Steam Workshop, but from what I've read, the functionality is fully present on the Switch version as well. Once you're done with the story and want to try something else, you have the Tournament mode, which is a boss rush mode where you fight all of the game's bosses with a preset selection of weapons. Then there's Speedrun mode, which lets you repeat any of the game's stages and also gives you a fixed set of weapons, but this time you have to beat the stage as fast as possible. Most interesting is the Challenge mode, which has a bunch of short stages with some balls scattered through them, and you have to collect them all before reaching the goal. Again, you have preset weapons and you have to do it in as little time as possible. But before I give this game a glowing recommendation, I do have to point out that the difficulty can swing wildly between levels, and depending on how well you adapt to the weapon mechanics and Flame's whip abilities. Unlike the classics of yestercentury, the stages themselves tend to be on the easy side, instead of ball-bustingly hard, even in the remixed mode. The controls are very fluid, Grit's health bar is pretty generous and most basic enemies just don't pose much resistance. Spirit Burden also doesn't feel like it changes much. Enemies are stronger, but it's not very noticeable in practice, and the Horseman quickly becomes a non-issue since his attack patterns never change and he has much lower health than other bosses. But then you have a handful of sections that just kicked my ass a couple of times until I got the hang of them, and most of those involve instant death pits. These can get rather frustrating, because the problematic ones are conveniently placed right before a checkpoint. So if you want to try again, you have to spend a couple of minutes dealing with enemies that likely won't give you any problems. Some of this I think could have been avoided if there was any indication as to how hard each stage is, or alternatively have the first part of the game be linear rather than letting the player select any of the stages. You see, the USA stage is the one that shows up right next to Canada, the very first one, so naturally I was initially drawn to that one. That was a mistake. It's one of the hardest stages with one of the hardest bosses. On my first playthrough I must have spent half an hour repeating the exact same section because I was a total scrub who took way too long to adjust to Flame's whip swinging and continuously fell to my death. And each time I was forced to repeat half a stage that I could already beat with a blindfold on. This was then followed up with me clearing the Mexico stage in a single run without breaking a sweat. Yeah, the bosses are all over the place too. In fact, the final boss is one of the easiest in the game. But to flip that on its head, continuing the stage after Grit is defeated feels a bit pointless, since Flame cannot trigger checkpoints by herself. And if she's defeated, you get sent back to the previous checkpoint, even if you progress beyond the next one. I mean, you can still finish the stage with only Flame, and technically it's not impossible to beat the entire game that way if you're an absolute maverick with balls of steel, but it's extremely hard to say the least, since she lacks the mobility and offensive abilities that Grit has. But overall, those occasional bumps ended up being nothing more than tiny blips on the radar, and my time with this game was overwhelmingly positive, and I wish there was more. So yes, I am going ahead with that glowing recommendation. Panzer Paladin has retro goodness, giant robots, and a sexy android lady. What more could you ask for?